This is the Galaxy S23. Not the Plus, not the Ultra, just the good old vanilla variety S23. And I'm just gonna say up front, I reckon this has gotta be one of the most underrated phones of the year. You see, when this phone launched, most of the headlines went straight to the S23 Ultra, and I couldn't even get my hands on a review unit of this thing. So I decided to just buy it myself because I was really curious as to whether it was any good. And so 4 months after its release, after a bunch of software updates, and after an extended period of time using this thing, I'm finally bringing you my in-depth review. So let's dive in. Kicking things off, we're going to talk about the design. And look, yes, I admit it is fairly stock standard, with there only being some very minor changes in comparison to last year's lineup. In fact, some may argue that it's become even more basic looking thanks to the fact that we no longer have that camera bump that flows around and onto the side of the phone. But as far as I'm concerned, I actually really like the design of this phone. It's got that beautiful frosted glass finish on the back, incredibly thin and consistently sized bezels on the front, and the smaller form factor of this regular version is really, really nice. The only thing I wish Samsung would improve about this design is giving the sides of the phone a matte finish as opposed to this glossy finish that we've seen for quite some time now. But aside from that, big ticks from me in regards to the design of this phone. And then there's this display, which is virtually the exact same beautifully bright and fluid display from last year's model, but with a slight bump up in max brightness from 1300 nits to 1750 nits. And this makes it very viewable and usable in bright, sunny conditions. Again, it's largely the same as last year's display, but that's not really an issue for me because the display on this phone is great. Moving on to the fingerprint sensor now, and in all honesty, Samsung's fingerprint sensors largely go unnoticed these days, but that's mainly because of how reliable they are. They're always placed in the correct position, they're fast and accurate, and the fact that Samsung is still one of the few manufacturers who uses the much better ultrasonic fingerprint sensor technology compared to the not so impressive optical technology, that is somewhat baffling to me. The only improvement I'd like Samsung to make in their next lineup of devices is utilizing those larger sensors that we've started seeing on some other high-end devices over the past year. Oh, and they still haven't improved their face unlock functionality, meaning it still has that annoying issue where when you successfully scan your face on the lock screen, it then causes the fingerprint sensor icon to completely disappear. And this is seriously one of the biggest oversights in regards to the software experience on this phone. And Samsung, I will continue to mention this in every single review of your phones until you finally fix it. Now, before we chat about software, let's very quickly touch on haptics, and I'm pleased to report that much like the S22 last year, the haptics in this phone are world class. Just as nice, at least in my opinion, as those found in the much more expensive S23 Ultra. Honestly, up there with some of the best, and my only wish is that Samsung would implement them throughout the user experience a little more, because other than typing, you rarely feel the incredible haptics, which seems like a waste. All right, let's now chat about software and performance. And I'm not going to go into as much depth on this topic in this video, as I covered pretty much everything you need to know about the software on this phone in my review of the S23 Ultra, linked below. But that is actually a really, really good thing because the software and performance on that much more expensive phone was super impressive. I mean, this phone has nearly the exact same specs as that phone, with the only difference being that you don't have the option of upgrading to 12 gigabytes of RAM, and there is also no 1 terabyte storage option. But aside from that, everything else is identical. And one of the biggest contributing factors that makes this phone feel so much faster and more fluid in comparison to last year's phones is the software, and more specifically One UI 5.1, which saw Samsung finally making some big improvements in regards to animations and overall fluidity. Now, as I mentioned in my review of the S23 Ultra, this software update has also improved the software and performance of older Samsung phones as well. So this isn't a feature limited to just this newer S23 lineup, but regardless, this was an area I complained about in last year's review of the S22 Plus. And so whichever way you look at it, it's a massive improvement that I am hugely grateful for. Now, whilst we're on the topic of software, I just wanted to take a moment to thank today's video sponsor, Pulseway. And for anyone who reckons it's impossible to be in more than one place at a time, well, Pulseway would beg to differ. You see, Pulseway is an IT monitoring and management platform that gives its users access to any system and system device from one place. And this means you can use it to respond to and control everything as easily as you like. What's amazing though is that Pulseway also has a fully functional mobile app, and this makes quickly patching and resolving any issues outrageously convenient. As soon as an issue pops up, it'll instantly send you a notification both on the web platform and via the mobile app. And this means you'll be able to step in straight away, fix the issue, and potentially even save the day. Trust me, this is the sort of tool that makes IT technicians straight up heroes. So to level up your IT management, use the first link down in the description to start a free, non-commitment based trial and experience the amazing platform that is Pulseway today. Okay, so from there, let's chat about the cameras. And on paper, aside from the design and the lack of an S Pen, this is just about the only area where you can see a noticeable difference in comparison to the much more premium S23 Ultra. Now, that's not to say that this phone has a subpar camera configuration, which I will talk about in a moment, but it's just acknowledging the fact that, according to Samsung anyway, the S23 Ultra was the phone that received all of the upgrades in regards to the camera system, whereas the camera configuration on the S23, it's the exact same as the one found on the S22. Now, to be fair, in real world testing, I actually found the cameras on the S23 Ultra to be very, very similar to the ones found on the S22 Ultra. So for me, just because it has the better, more improved camera system on paper, that doesn't mean that you should immediately disregard the cameras found on this phone. As far as I'm concerned, the only real tangible difference between the two phones is that the regular S23 does not have that 10x periscope lens, which of course I do miss having, but I still have 3 really great rear cameras, including a super solid 3x telephoto lens. So for me personally, I'm more than satisfied with the camera experience on this phone. Now, the final feature I want to talk about with the S23 that I saved for last just because of how impressive it's been is the battery life. Last year, whilst a lot of users loved the regular S22, the smaller form factor and therefore smaller battery meant it left a lot to be desired in said battery life department. And I'll be honest, I was fearing for the worst when I started using this phone. But then a couple of days finishing with around 50% battery life, that turned into a week, then into a month, and no joke, in the entire time I've been using this phone, not once have I even gotten close to killing it in a single day. Like, the lowest I've gotten it to on heavier days of use was just under 40%. But like I said, most days it's sitting on or above 50% when I'm setting it onto the charger at night. And that becomes all the more impressive when you realize that this phone still has a much smaller 3900 mAh cell inside compared to the fairly significantly bigger 5000 mAh cell found inside the S23 Ultra. And so I don't know what sort of wizardry Samsung have got going on in the background in regards to battery optimization, but whatever it is, that, alongside the impressive efficiency of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip being used, man, this might just be the new contender for battery champ of the year for me. And so, all that being said, given just how impressive this little phone is and its much more tolerable launch price in comparison to the very premium S23 Ultra, this is a phone I cannot recommend highly enough. Now look, I still personally prefer the Pixel software experience or even the software found on phones running AOSP-based ROMs. And like I said, with the S23 Ultra, whilst I do really like the camera experience on this phone, I still don't love the photos as much as I do whenever I'm using a Pixel phone. But if you told me that I could no longer use any other phone for the next 2 years and the S23 was the one that I was left with, I would honestly be more than happy continuing to use this phone. It's got a great, minimal, yet modern design language with a lovely form factor. It performs beautifully. It's got a very flexible camera configuration and outstanding battery life. And so, as far as I'm concerned, if you're in the market for a new phone that ticks all the boxes without feeling the need to be overly flashy, well then this one is a very, very good get.